Have you ever stared at a photograph you took yourself and realized something in it had moved? Not blurred from your hand shaking, not a trick of the light moved. I've shot over 12,000 crime scene images in my career, and I can account for every pixel in every frame, except for one image from a case that still makes my hands tremble when I think about it. It was supposed to be routine, just another closed room, another sequence of shots for evidence. But in that sealed environment, under controlled lighting, something in the frame shifted between exposures. And when I noticed what it was, every rule of physics I trusted as a professional fell silent. The worst part, that image was only the first sign. There were 24 photographs taken that night. In one of them, a shadow was missing. In the next, it wasn't where it should have been. And in the last, it was somewhere no one should have been standing. My name is Daniel Mercer. For over 14 years I worked as a crime scene photographer with the Millfield Police Department's Forensic Services Unit. I came into the job from a background in documentary photography, first as a freelancer, then contracted by the city morgue for post-mortem records. My specialty became scene fidelity, recording an environment so precisely that an investigator could later reconstruct it down to the position of a hair on the floor. I was good at it, good enough that detectives trusted my photographs over their own memories. In my career, my images have been entered into evidence in 267 cases, 48 of which resulted in convictions where the visual record was decisive. The department used me on the heavy ones: homicides, suspicious deaths, and the occasional cold case reopened for reanalysis. Our standing rule was simple: nothing in the frame could be questioned. No lens artifacts, no lighting inconsistencies. We kept redundant backups, embedded metadata, and an unbroken chain of custody from shutter click to evidence locker. People imagine crime scene photography as cinematic camera flashes and dramatic angles, but the reality is sterile and procedural. We worked in Tyvek suits, nitrile gloves, and respirators if necessary. Every frame had to be time-stamped, referenced against a scale marker, and logged with its own sequence ID. IK2 Nikon D6 bodies, serial numbers 3084475 and 3084481, each with calibrated 35mm and 50mm prime lenses. I kept silica packs in every case, changed batteries before every call, and ran pre- and post-scene diagnostics on the sensors. I could tell you without looking what my aperture was set to by the way the ring felt under my glove. I was also, I'll admit, a creature of habit. Before every shift I checked my gear in the same order: camera bodies, lenses, spare cards, portable strobes, tripod. I kept my watch set to UTC, to match the digital recorders we sometimes ran alongside photographic logs. And though I never told anyone when we zipped the evidence cases shut at the end of a scene, I always touched the zipper tab twice with my thumb, a private superstition, my way of silently promising the dead that their last image would be an honest one. Over time, the work took its toll. You don't spend years in blood-stale apartments in unlit woods without it leaving marks. My hands would sometimes tremor after long shifts, and I developed the habit of listening for the slow tick of my office wall clock when I processed images. It was grounding. When I finally left the department last year, I told people it was burnout, and that was true, but not the whole truth. The real reason I left was one scene in the spring of a case where the photographs refused to stay still, where no matter how many times I checked the metadata, I couldn't explain why one frame didn't match the laws of light and shadow. It started as just another call, late in a long week, and I only recognized the depth of it after it was too late to walk away. I still have the camera body. It's in a locked case, in climate-controlled storage. The card from that night is sealed in an evidence envelope, never reused. I can't bring myself to destroy it, but I'll never put it back in a camera either. Every few months I'll think about it, and my thumb will unconsciously tap twice on the table in front of me, just like I used to on those zippers. A promise to the dead, and a reminder to myself, whatever happened in those frames, and I'm still not sure who or what was standing where no one should have been. Most of my career was spent in the Forensic Services Unit's downtown office, a third-floor suite above the municipal garage. The windows rattled when snowplows passed in winter, and in summer the air conditioner hummed loud enough to mask casual conversation. Our workspace wasn't glamorous: gray metal desks, banks of storage cabinets with tamper seals, racks of tripods and light stands, but everything had its place. Disorder in our environment led to errors in the field, so we kept it tight. We worked in rotating two-person teams for scene coverage, backed by a rotating pool of technicians. On a typical evening shift, I'd be paired with another photographer or a scene tech, while the on-call evidence officer handled intake. For us, routine meant arriving at the station around 15:00, checking gear, scanning the day's assignments, and waiting for the call-out page. My usual kit weighed about 18 kilograms once everything was packed. 2 primary camera bodies, backup body in the van, lens cases, spare batteries, 3 lighting units, a color chart, scale rulers in multiple lengths, and a foldable forensic backdrop. Each item was logged in and out under my ID, DM473, so that if a case ever came under scrutiny, the chain of custody was clear. By the time 2021 rolled around, the department had begun to issue digital asset tags for all photographs. The tags embedded encrypted timestamps, lens and sensor IDs, and GPS coordinates into the file headers. It was meant to eliminate disputes in court, but it also meant there was nowhere to hide if you made a mistake. The camera didn't just record the scene, it recorded you. Our nights were often uneventful. Burglary reports, unattended deaths in nursing homes, traffic fatalities when the weather turned. The air in those scenes was a mix of latex gloves, field antiseptic, and whatever the victim had left behind: coffee gone sour in a mug, laundry detergent lingering in the hall. I'd gotten used to those smells, but sometimes the work got strained. You'd walk into a locked apartment and find the thermostat set to 82 BFAF in midsummer, with every window latched from inside, or an accident scene where all the injuries made sense, except for one mark that didn't match the mechanism. In our line of work, strange usually had a mundane explanation: a neighbor fiddling with the heat, an unrelated injury from earlier in the day. Still, I learned to note those things in my own records, even if they didn't make it into the official report. The others on my team joked about my quiet log, but they respected it. Every tech had their quirks. Mine was paying attention to the details no one thought mattered until later. In the weeks before that call, we'd been running a lot of overtime. There had been a string of homicides, most tied to drug disputes, and the caseload was wearing everyone down. My partner that month was Detective Sergeant Alan Cho, who pulled double duty as both lead scene investigator and unofficially department skeptic. Alan had a way of cutting through rumors with blunt facts. If you told him you heard a noise in an empty room, he'd point to the ductwork and explain the air pressure differential. If you swore an object moved, he'd have a plausible account of vibrations or handling air. We needed people like Alan. Forensic work runs on rigor, not superstition. And yet there were times late at night in a sealed building when even Alan would grow quiet, and you'd see him glance over his shoulder before unlocking the van. On the night of April 9, 2021, the weather had turned unseasonably cold. At 21:40, the pager on my belt buzzed. A single tone, priority 2. That meant a confirmed death, scene secure, photographs required before the coroner moved the body. Alan was already shrugging into his jacket when I grabbed my kit. Just another one for the files, he said, glancing at the printout from dispatch. His tone was casual, but I caught the brief hesitation in his step when he saw the address. It was an older building on the east side, near the river. I'd been there before 3 years earlier for a domestic homicide. That time my job had been straightforward: establish the scene, document the evidence, keep my gloves dry. This time, well, I didn't know it yet, but I was walking back into a space that had its own history, and as I would later find out, some things inside it hadn't moved on. The call sheet gave the basics: date, time, 09 April 2021, 21:42. Classification: unattended death, possible foul play. Reporting Officer Date J. Hammond. Coroner ETA 2310 Airs. Alan drove, the van's dashboard clock glowing against the frost on the windshield. The streets were quiet, the kind of cold spring night where sound carries too far. I reviewed the job in my head. Initial wide shots, cardinal point coverage, mid-range evidence frames, close-ups with scale. It was muscle memory by then. When we pulled up, 2 patrol units were parked nose to nose at the curb. The building itself was a 3-story brick from the 1940s, its entrance recessed under a chipped concrete awning. The hallway smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and cleaning solvent. Old building smells. Not unusual. Detective Hammond met us at the stairwell. He was the kind of officer who wasted no words. Male, mid-50s. Neighbor hadn't seen him in 2 days. Called it in. Door was locked. Chain in place from inside. No sign of forced entry. We haven't touched anything except to confirm death. Alan asked the questions. Time of call. Who had entered. Any known medical history. While I signed the scene log, ID number and time down to the minute. 21:57 error. Only 3 other entries above mine. Hammond, his partner and the EMS crew who'd declared the victim DOA. At 21. Inside Apt 3B was dim, lit only by the yellow cast of a single ceiling fixture in the kitchenette. The air was still heavy. I've learned to read a room before even raising my camera. Furniture positions, disturbed items, odd temperature zone. The thermostat read 68°F, but there was a chill in the far end of the living room. The deceased, later ID'd as Gregory L. Horwitz, was seated in an armchair facing a blank television screen. His posture was strange, back straight, hands resting flat on the armrests, eyes half lit. There was no visible blood, no overturned furniture. Alan did a slow circuit while I prepped my first camera body. Looks clean, he murmured, maybe a cardiac event, but he kept frowning at the man's right wrist where a faint abrasion ring encircled the skin. Ligature mark, or just an old watch band imprint. It was too even to be from casual wear. Per protocol, I started with orientation shots from the doorway. ISO locked at 800, 35mm prime, tripod for stability. Each click was logged mentally. Frame 1, north wall, frame 2, east wall. At frame 4 I caught myself pausing longer than usual. The lighting from the kitchenette fixture cast shadows behind every object, chair, coffee table, the small bookshelf in the corner. Every object, except the victim. From my angle, there was no clear silhouette against the far wall. I filed that thought away, and kept working. Alan, as expected, dismissed my quiet observation when I mentioned it. Angle Dan. His shadow's probably falling into the room, not onto the wall. We'll see it from another position. Maybe he was right. I moved clockwise, documenting each quadrant, waiting for the coroner's team to arrive. That was when I noticed the camera's internal clock had jumped ahead by exactly 62 seconds between 2 consecutive frames. Not a battery fault, full charge, and not user error. The metadata would show it later, but in the moment, I just noted it in my field log. Nothing at the time seemed urgent enough to stop the process. But looking back, that was the first point in the night when the record of the scene stopped lining up with the reality in front of me, and it would only get stranger from there. By 2218 airs, I had completed the standard perimeter series and moved to mid-range documentation. I swapped to 50mm prime for evidence isolation, hands, face, and the abrasion mark Alan had noted. The man's skin tone was slightly mottled, but without the usual dependent lividity pattern you'd expect in a seated death. His pupils were dilated, the cornea starting to haze. That was when I noticed it again, the absence of his shadow. I was positioned now almost directly opposite my earlier angle, the kitchenette light behind me. Every object in the room cast a soft-edged form toward the wall behind the chair, but where Horwitz sat, the light broke around him in a way I'd never seen. It was as if his outline diffused before it reached the wall. I didn't say anything immediately. You learn quickly in forensics that observations need grounding before they're worth sharing. But when I adjusted my strobe for the close-ups, the anomaly persisted. Flash exposure should have thrown a crisp, hard shadow. Nothing. just an oddly even gradient behind him. Alan stepped into my frame, leaning over to inspect the wrist mark. Could be from a plastic restraint, he said, or skin reaction from something tight. No breaks in the dermis. I mentioned the missing shadow. He glanced toward the wall, then back at me with a faint smirk. Dan, the lights hitting him from multiple sources overhead. Your strobes spill from the hall. Shadows get washed out. That's why we bracket exposures. It was a reasonable explanation. I bracketed 3 exposures. Normal, pause 1 stop, pause 1 stop. In each, the wall behind him was bare of any defined silhouette. I logged it in my private notes. Subject seated. No discrete shadow formation under multiple lighting conditions. Possible surface reflectance anomaly or ambient interference. At 22:34 hours, I began the object detail sequence. Remote controls, reading glasses, a mug half full of dark liquid. On frame 19, my right strobe failed to fire. The ready light was still on, battery fresh, but the trigger had simply not happened. Alan looked up at the faint pop from the left strobe and asked if I was good. I nodded, but inside I felt that prickle you get when something's wrong in a way you can't name. We heard the coroner's team in the hallway at 22:46 hours, their gurney wheels squeaking over the worn linoleum. I stepped back to give them access. As they moved Horwitz slightly forward to check posterior lividity, my eye caught the wall again. For a fraction of a second, there was a shadow, a narrow dark band, except it wasn't aligned with his movement. It stood as if someone else was between him and the wall. I blinked and it was gone. Alan was already signing the handover sheet when I leaned toward him. Did you see that? See what? He didn't even look up. Never mind. He shrugged. Like I said, angles and light. But I'd been in enough sealed rooms to know, angles and light obey rules, and something in 3B had just broken one. Once the coroner's team had the body bagged, Alan and I stayed behind for the post-removal suite. This is when we catch what the larger items might have hidden. Floor marks, trace evidence, shell casings kicked under furniture. The room felt lighter without Horwitz in the chair, but not warm. If anything, the cold spot in the far end of the living room was sharper, like stepping in front of an open freezer. I began the floor-level sequence, lens just above the carpet pile. At 23:02 hours, the first irregularity hit my ears rather than my eyes, a soft intermittent tap, spaced evenly. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. It wasn't from outside. Through my nitrile gloves I could feel it faintly in the floor. Alan crouched to check under the coffee table. You hear that? I asked. He didn't look up. Old building, pipes, but the sound didn't have the random clank of plumbing. It was metered, deliberate. I recorded 15 seconds of it on my body mic, noting time and location. Moving into the hallway, I photographed the door chain, latched when patrol arrived, according to Hammond's log, and the lock cylinder, which showed no pry marks. On the return pass into the living room, my camera's file counter jumped. Between frame 42 and frame 44, frame 43 simply didn't exist. The LCD skipped the number. I swapped cards immediately. Both were department issue, fresh format before arrival. In the kitchenette, another detail caught me. The digital clock on the stove read. My wristwatch synced to the department server read 23:14. Nearly an hour difference, though the power light on the clock was steady. No recent outage. Alan reappeared from the bedroom with a small evidence envelope. Old prescription bottles, all expired. He seemed unfazed, but I noticed he was keeping his back to the living room as he spoke. By 23:28 hours, we were ready to clear. I did one last sweep with the wide lens, panning slowly to capture the full space. As I turned past the empty armchair, the cold surged over my knuckles, sharp enough I flexed my hands inside the gloves. The tap 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 started again, quicker now, like someone impatient on the other side of a wall. Alan was already halfway to the door. Come on, Dan. We're done here. We left the apartment sealed, lock bar in place, and descended to the van. The whole way down the stairwell, I kept checking the shadows cast by our flashlights against the walls. They all looked normal, until we stepped outside and I realized I'd been walking in Alan's light. I hadn't cast a shadow the whole way down. I didn't say anything on the ride back. Alan drove in silence, heater on full, windshield fogging at the edges. I sat with the camera bag on my lap, feeling the cold still in my glove. Every instinct told me to dump the card into the evidence server immediately, but a stronger pull made me want to see the frames first privately. At 0004 hours, we rolled into the garage. Alan signed out and headed upstairs without a word. I went straight to the imaging lab. Lights low, hum of the ventilation steady. Our workstations were air-gapped from the network for evidence integrity. I slotted the card into the reader, opened the sequence: frame 1 doorway, north wall, frame 2 east wall, frame 4 south wall, all as expected. Then frame 114, the first full-body shot of Horwitz. My breath caught. In the frame he was seated exactly as I'd seen him, but his head was turned toward the camera. In reality, he'd been staring past the blanked television when I clicked the shutter. His eyes in the image were locked on me. I checked the metadata: shutter 125, FF556. Timestamp matched my field log. There was no possible way for him to have shifted like that between shots without me noticing. My tripod hadn't moved. My strobe recycle time was 2 seconds. Frame 15, taken seconds later, showed him as I remembered, eyes half-lidded, head forward. The logical part of my brain scrambled for explanations. Equipment error, double exposure, some kind of motion artifact. But the head angle in frame 14 was too precise, the gaze too deliberate. I scrolled on. Frame 19, the strobe misfire was darker, ambient light only. In the shadows of the wall behind the chair, there was a vertical shape. It wasn't human exactly, more like the outline of a person in the split second before they step into a doorway. And then the missing frame existed after all, except it shouldn't have. It loaded without a thumbnail, took several seconds to resolve. When it did, it wasn't the living room at all. It was the hallway outside 3B, the chain lock hanging open. The perspective was from inside, as if the camera had been set on the floor looking out. I hadn't taken that picture. The room around me felt smaller. The vents hummed louder. I backed out of the sequence and removed the card, sealing it in a fresh evidence envelope with my initials and the top. Alan's voice startled me from the doorway. "You're still here." I turned the monitor off. "Just wrapping up." He eyed the sealed envelope. "Everything line up?" I thought about the eyes in frame 14, the shadow in 19, the impossible angle of nothing out of the ordinary, I said. But I knew I'd just crossed a line. Whatever was in that apartment had followed me back in pixels and metadata, maybe in the part of my mind that had always trusted what my camera saw. And now it was in the record, locked inside a chain of custody I couldn't break without someone asking why. 2 days later, the anomalies stopped being mine alone. At morning briefing, another photographer, Mara Ortiz, mentioned a camera glitch from a scene 3 blocks from Keller Street. Different address, different victim, but her wide shots had produced a similar blank shadow effect on a hallway wall. Alan brushed it off in front of the team, but I caught him glancing at me when she spoke. I checked the evidence server that afternoon. Mara's images carried the same subtle metadata hitch. A 1-minute timestamp jump in mid-sequence, no corresponding log entry, and in one of her frames behind a partially open door was that same vertical silhouette. By the end of the week, 3 more cases from the east side had flagged missing or duplicated frames in the archive audit. All scenes were indoors. All had been locked from the inside when first responders arrived, and all showed at least one photo where a shadow failed to register under multiple light sources. The tech unit ran diagnostics, no firmware bugs, no server corruption. Equipment rotated between teams, yet the anomalies persisted only in cases within a 6-block radius of Keller Street. Hammond circulated a memo about isolated file irregularities, but internally some of us started calling it the blind spot. No one wanted to say it out loud, but it felt like we were documenting the same unseen presence in different rooms, attached not to a person, but to a place. and I couldn't shake the sense that whatever it was, it had learned to find the lens. On April 17th, I was dispatched back to 418 Keller Street, different unit, same building. The report was carbon copy, door locked from inside, occupant unresponsive. Alan was with me again, silent during the drive. Inside 2A, the air was colder than the outside night. The victim, a woman in her 40s, lay on the couch. As I set my tripod, my watch ticked over to 22:31 errors, and the kitchenette clock, identical to 3B's, read 23:33. I started my sweep. By frame 7 I felt that prickle between my shoulders. Frame 8 confirmed it in the reflection of the dark TV screen. A shape stood directly behind me. No one had entered after us. Alan was across the room in full view. I forced myself through the rest of the sequence, bracketing exposures, logging time. Then the tapping started faster than in 3B, almost urgent. Alan froze mid-note, staring at the wall behind me. "What?" I asked. He shook his head. "Thought I saw." He stopped, swallowed. "Never mind, let's finish." When I reviewed the images on site, frame 12 was wrong. The victim's face was turned toward the camera, eyes open, though she'd been face down moments earlier. We cleared as fast as procedure allowed. That night, alone in the lab, I pulled the card. The last frame, frame 28, wasn't the living room. It was my own back, bent over the tripod, shot from no more than 3 feet away. I hadn't taken it, and it meant something else had been in the room with us. I left the department less than a month later. Officially it was personal reason. Unofficially I knew I couldn't keep bringing that presence back with me in the lens. The sealed envelopes from Keller Street, mine, Mara's, the others are still in evidence storage. No one talks about them now. The case is closed without clear cause, all ruled undetermined. Sometimes late at night, I'll test myself, stand in front of a mirror with a camera, take a single frame. I always check the background first, scanning for places a shadow might hide. Last week I woke at 3:17 a.m., certain I'd heard the shutter click from the other room. My cameras are locked in a case. No one else has the key. My principle has always been the same: give the scene the truth it deserves. But I've learned there are truths no one can put in a report. And one detail I can't ignore: Keller Street's been empty since last year. But sometimes when I pass at night, every window is dark except one, 3rd floor, facing the river. The blinds are open, and something is always standing just out of the light.